Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Mercedes Bristol, from the Texas Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. That's a hell of a mouthful, that, Mercedes. Yeah. But
It
welcome
sure
to the
is.
show.
It sure is. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
You're very, very welcome. So, yeah, Mercedes, she adopted five of her grandchildren. They are her kids, and founded the organization off the back of that, and a big missing hole, right? There was no support for these people. So we start with the thriving question then, Mercedes. What does thriving mean to you?
For me, thriving means that you have something to look forward to. You have things that you're already living, and it's also a place where people are not just surviving. I remember after getting the five children, I was somebody said, to me, why don't you teach these grandchildren how to speak Spanish? And I remember saying, I'm just surviving. I'm just surviving this journey. It was such a heaviness. And to me now to look at what's thriving, and I feel like when you plant a plant, right? And it's nourished and it's getting fed and it's taken care of, and it has all these nutrients and things, and then it looks beautiful and it's thriving. It's happy. It's
Yeah,
alive. And so that's the difference that I see for thriving for me.
yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, I just got to tell you that this happened when Mercedes was 57, right? She was that's when this was sprung on you, right? So, in a different part of your life, right? And then boom, everything changes. Uh, a that must have been a challenge to your thriving in that moment, right?
It was, at 57, I was planning on a retirement, right? I was single. I had been divorced now for about 8 years. And then taking care of my mom. She was herself, she had COPD. And then she passed away. And then I thought, okay, what do I do with myself, right? It's like, so I started thinking about, oh, as soon as I retire, I was 57, I figured I retired at 60 and start traveling. Well, at 57, I was surprised with the five grandkids.
Oh my
And
God.
what do? You take
Yeah.
them.
What do you do? So, going back to this metaphor that you had of nourishing, feeding, taking care of the grandkids who have now become your kids, right? And the nutrients. What have you learned about that? How can you kind of extend that metaphor into what it means for you raising your grandkids that are now your kids?
Well, one of the metaphors that comes to my mind right now, they had issues. These children that are taken away from homes, and this had been their third removal, so they had a lot of trauma around the leaving parents, coming back, leaving parents, coming back, and on the third removal, I just put my foot down, and I hired an attorney, and I did an intervention, which then the parents could not do their services, so I ended up adopting them. But one of the things I learned is that, with their behavior problems, there was a lot of a lot of nurturing, right? How do you provide all of this nurturing and love to these children that are challenged? And so one of the things I learned is that, like for example, the 6-year-old at that time, they had to evacuate the classroom because of his behavior. So we learned that he had PTSD and ADHD, and oppositional defiance. And Simon, I didn't know what all those acronyms meant. And so I was talking to a friend of mine one day, and she said, it's very hard to straighten up a tree that's already crooked. And so back to the plants, right? When you plant a plant and it's now growing sideways, and then you get it and you want to nourish it and bring it back to health. it is a challenge because how do you provide all of that space for five children with the 3-month-old have breathing problems and a lot of health issues, required 3 sets of tubes within his 5 year between 3 months and 5 years old. So all of those things are hard to be able to have that thriving sensation because you have to bring in people to help you really get those nutrients in the ground.
Yeah. And to me, the whole challenge is your capacity for this, right? The space to handle, keep all the plates spinning, to use another metaphor with you really have your hands full. So you got to dig deep in those moments. But what was that about for you? Where did you find that capacity?
Well, I went to my church and I asked, I needed hands on deck. I needed people to come and help me. There was one lady that I was able to come in, and she would come in 3 times a week, and she would help me from 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I was still working, and she would come in while I was still at work and prepare meals for me. And then when we got home from picking up all the five grandkids from daycare. Um, she would have dinner. She would help me with them. She would help me take them a bath and put them to bed by 8 o'clock. So that was kind of a routine that helped me manage the spinning plate, like you said, right? And so the other thing is I have my daughter, which is their aunt, and she would come in on the weekends and give me some help. And I just relied on my community to be
Yeah,
able to assist me with some of the issues that we had.
yeah, yeah. And what about the internal capacity?
Well, Simon, I went through a depression. It was very hard for me to balance everything at the beginning. And how that started is, and I didn't even know I was depressed. What happened is I got sick. I had bronchitis, went to my doctor, and my doctor, by the grace of God, was very, very intuitive. And so he said, I'm going to treat your symptoms. He says, but you really need to take care of a deeper thing that's going on within you. And he says, you need to take care of those emotions. So he invited me to attend these Al Anon meetings. And so I started attending. I started realizing that I had to change my perspective, my way of thinking. Because I remember saying, I have to take these kids. I have to do this. And when I was going through that program, and it's a 12-step program for Alcoholics Anonymous, having you look at how you contribute to the madness that's going on. And I went through the 12 steps and I realized that I had to turn all of this over to God. But then I had the support of other people going through similar situations that can support me on my thinking, on my way of looking, outlook on things. Excuse me. And that really helped me mentally.
Yeah. So it seems a big leap from depression to Al-Anon. Where was the um, overlap? Where was they seem very distinctive, different kind of things to me.
It was because once I started taking care of myself, first medication, right, to get off get the bronchitis and get me back to health. And then the doctor did prescribe some antidepressants. And so while I was going through that emotional stuff, then I was able to press, and I also got counseling. I was also in counseling. How do I manage myself to be able to help these children? And that was the key between, it was like a three-legged stool. The medicine, the counseling, and the program really helped me focus on where my priorities were to be able to handle everything and being able to
Yeah,
give the services to the kids.
yeah. So what were the perspective changes when we spoke last time? You talked about aha moments. So they're one in the same to me. Like it's just two different words for the same thing. an insight, a change in our perspective, or an aha moment. So, what were those for you, Mercedes? What were the big moments?
Well, as you're seeing, I was seeing my life, changing, and I was one time I was in church, and I saw myself with these five children all over me. Right, standing there, and I had this sense of overwhelmness of like, this is my life. I have to do something about, and I felt very disempowered, and I remember saying to God, I said, I can't do this, Lord. They're five children. They need a mom and a dad. They don't need a grandmother to a single grandmother to boot, that I didn't have families, a husband. And so I remember the Lord telling me at that time that to stop being a victim and be proactive. That they were there these were his children, and he would take care of them and take care of me. And at that moment was that aha moment. It's like, Lord, I'll trust you. I'm going to trust you that you are going to get us through this.
Yeah, yeah. So, was it a major turning point for you that?
It was because now I saw things that, and with the work with Al-Anon, with the again, the empowerment that Al-Anon gives was I can, I have the tools, I just have to access them. And
Yeah,
so that was my whole moment of how can I get from this point, but it had to start with my thinking and letting go of the victim role. The victim role was a really big thing because I don't know how a lot of parents feel or grandparents, but what I felt is that I got dumped all these kids. I had no choice. But through the program and through help, turning it over to God, I felt like, no, I did have a choice. But because I loved them, I had a choice to get these children and nurture them and have them become what God wanted them to become because they were His children.
yeah. So you didn't make the change happen. God made the change happen, the insight happen.
Yes, yes.
How do you see the relationship between trauma and thriving, Mercedes?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Trauma
No,
is
no simple questions on this pod,
no,
right?
no simple questions. Trauma is so difficult to find out what kind of trauma each one child had. And for to be able to change that trauma or at least understand it was very difficult for me because I'm old school, right? I'm 57. I wasn't brought up with all of these acronyms with ADHD, PTSD, RAD, and all of these things that now people get labeled, but you see the behavior. So when for example, the 6-year-old they call me at work because they had to evacuate the classroom because he just tore the classroom apart and something triggered him. And I had no clue. So when I got to the school, they had him sitting there with an iPad. And I said, why are you rewarding him? He just caused a whole chaos here. And they said that's the only way we can de-escalate him. And that was the only way that they can, look at
Yeah,
his trauma and be able to deal with the trauma and not the behavior. And that was a big mind shift for me. It's to now look at a trauma because in my mind, old school, I would have spanked them and I would have said, no, you do not behave that way. You have more respect for people and for your elders. And so learning on each child's trauma, the 7-year-old at the time, I learned that she had been bathed by chemicals because mom had been on drugs and thought she had bugs all over her. So she bathed her in chemicals. Imagine that trauma, and now having to repair that, and how do you nurture and have these children thrive through what they went through?
yeah. One of the things that hit me hard, I think it was last year, might have been the year before. I was sitting in an adoption conference, and the behavior topic came up, right? And I was thinking, I had a light bulb moment, right? I thought, the parents' biggest challenge is the kid's behavior, and they don't understand it. Right? And it's the same for the kid. They don't understand it either.
Right. Right.
Uh, How do you how do you begin to explain what's going on to to kids? Do, do you,
Once I got educated on what that was, and that's where, we try to educate grandparents because once I started learning what that was, like what is ADHD? What is it, how do you can't, how do you treat it? How do you deal with it? And so I started getting, the school gave me some books to read, and I was reading about that. And there's books out there for children to understand what ADHD is and what it does for them, and they can identify with some of the behaviors and having them understand that ADHD is just a condition of their mental condition. It's not a behavior that they can control a lot of times, but with proper, like one of the things that we had to deal with, I didn't want to put them on medication right at the beginning. So I started learning how do you treat some of these symptoms with nutrition. Well, for my kids, it didn't work. So I had to go back and look at, okay, do we explore medication? So I had to sit down with the children. There were six, seven, that were already of age. We got books that are for children. We read about them, explained what they were going through, and saying, I understand now that it's not a behavior problem, it's a condition that we need to learn at. And I had a lot of opposition from my ex-husband and my daughter about putting them on medication. And I had to educate them, that it wasn't a long-term medication, that we can have that medication supported to support them while they're going through counseling and learning different behaviors to be able to set patterns for them and choices. And so we started learning that, and it helped us, because it was to me, it was hard to accept. Imagine for a child.
yeah. I'm wondering if any aha moments, any of your kids' aha moments come to mind. You know, during the reading the books, working with the counselor, they're taking these drugs as a short-term tactic. D- Do you do you recall any moments for them when the penny dropped for them?
It was a struggle. It was a struggle with all of them because, again, I didn't have the support of my family members, and they kept saying that they didn't need the medication. So my kids grew up thinking that I forced them to take it, even though they understood their condition. But they thought they could do it on their own, and that was a struggle for me. However, the aha moment came when one of the granddaughters, it was in high school, and I gave her a choice not to take the medication. I said, you're in high school. If you think you got it, I said, I'm gonna give you that choice. And she didn't take it for one semester. And so her grades were going down. She was here, there, everywhere, with ADHD, they start a project and then they think of something else. Now they go do that. And so her grades started falling. And she came to me and she said, Grandma, I need the medication. I see that, it helps me stay focused, and it helps me complete what I have to do. So that was her own,
Yeah,
aha moment. And I was glad, not because I wanted to push the medication, because I wanted them to feel that they had a choice.
yeah. The word was that coming to my mind was empowerment. Yeah, you're giving her the choice. So,
Mhm.
what else? I think this is a really rich. It's a really rich vein for me. It's a very strong theme for thriving. To me, I talk a lot about, we're trying to get the kids to change their behavior. Well, why don't we give them the understanding, the tools for them to change their own behavior? You
Mhm.
know, that um, surely that's a better way to do it. Um, and this is based on work that I used to do before I started the adoption podcast with kids. Uh, um, what have you learned about empowering kids through choice, and what are you learning? Clearly, there's an age thing, right? It's got to be age appropriate, but rather than me trying to second guess it, why don't I just ask you the question, right? What have you learned about empowering kids and choice?
I think, again, because of my age, that was something that it was hard for me to shift, right? To be able to give them some control for themselves and stuff like that. So what I've learned is that both the caregiver and the child need to understand that the choice is not a control thing. It's a mutual understanding and agreement that this is going to be for their best interest, and they have to have a buy-in. They have to see the benefit for themselves. Like just like this granddaughter, right? She saw that she wasn't going to be able to make her grades if she didn't have that extra help. And so the other thing that comes with some of that medication with ADHD that we try to talk to them, I talk to them, to my children, and I learned is what are we putting in place as a safeguard in the schools? So, like we talk about 504s, special accommodations at schools, that they understand also that they have this deficiency type of going on, that if they see them, their grades dropping, or they see them inattentive, that they have a safeguard, like if they're not taking enough notes, and that they will actually provide that for them, because they have off days too, and so that's a collaborative thing, that we have the school and the child and the caregiver working with this child to give them the best tools that they need. And then the child doesn't feel like they're outcast, like they're different. They have the teacher helping, they have the caregiver, and they have a choice. Because once they choose not to get the help, then that's when they go downhill. And so, and you explain that to them, and you give them those choices.
Yeah, and it requires courage on your part, right? So you're giving her the choice of take the drugs or don't take the drugs, and you know that you could be in for a tough time
It
if
was
she
very
decides.
difficult. It was difficult because, it was difficult because then you have to have other things come into play, right? Consequences. So if your grades are dropping, it's your choice. So now you're going to have a consequence. If your grade drops below this, and it, to me was below a C, okay, then you lose your phone. And so you don't have access to your phone, because now you're spending more time on the phone or more time being distracted than the time you need to be studying. So you have consequences for that. So they have to make good choices. And
Yeah,
they have to know what the consequence is going to be if their grades go
yeah,
down, or if for example, at home she was she'd clean her room, right? They have three chores, clean the room, clean the bathroom, and pick up after themselves, right? And so when they were cleaning the room, they start the vacuum cleaner, and then all of a sudden they have the vacuum cleaners out, and now she's doing an art craft, a craft on the floor, and then she leaves the paints there, and now she comes downstairs to eat, and then she goes outside to play. And then I go in the room and I see the vacuum cleaner, I see the art stuff on the floor, and I'm like, let's backtrack, let's go back. And so that was choices that she made. And I says, okay, give me your phone. You lost it for the day. And it's hard, but they have to feel that the choice comes responsibilities. And if she chooses not to take the medication, she's going to have to work harder to be able to go back and do the things that she's responsible for.
yeah, yeah. When you when we spoke last week, you talked about the fact that um, you didn't want to be considered an angry parent, and that landed with me, in terms of I'm not quite sure which, and I'm not quite sorry, not quite sure why, but it seemed kind of a big moment when you saw that.
Well, one of the things that I discovered in my journey with these children is that I was angry. I was very angry with the parents because they weren't being responsible. They were out there doing their life how they wanted to, and I had five of their kids here, and I had all of these struggles to go through. And then, when they wanted to come and visit, it was a happy, oh, I love you, Disneyland parents, right? And then, they leave them, and then I got stuck with their behavior. And even though I had adopted them, because he's my son, I still wanted my son in my life, but I didn't realize that having my son in my life was causing more trauma to me and to the kids. So when I had that aha moment about I'm still angry, I even though I choose to have these kids, I didn't realize I was angry, disappointed, hurt, and I was like a bottle. And so some of those feelings, I realized that by having those feelings, and even though I do the work with Al-Anon and I do that, I was still not letting go of something. And that aha moment was a day where I blew up, and I felt like I'm triggering these children by having all these feelings bottled up and not being able to talk to really be honest with somebody that and then have the tools. So, when you have a tool and you're building a house, you finish the house and then you put the tools away, right? And that's part of our journey, that we're constantly building this house. We're constantly, picking up those tools and trying to chisel at that anger or that resentment or whatever comes up. And sometimes for example, the child would come in and he'd say, "Oh, my dad said I didn't have to do that." And there it goes, there goes that anger. And I'm like, no, your dad is not your parent, you know. And why would I say that? And I caught myself saying that to the child. And I thought, wait a minute. Instead of saying things like that that's going to hurt the child, I need to be responsible and say, well, thank you for sharing what your dad said, but while you're in this house, and I'm your parent here, we're going to do things this way. And that was a lot of my conversation. And when you're 18 and you want, you have a choice if you want to go back with your parent or not. But until you're 18, I am your parent, and we have rules in this house. And so those were the hard parts. How do you navigate those triggers, that anger that comes up when the child is, doing or saying things about that other parent? And I had to heal from that. I had to really look at uh, how do you separate those feelings from the parents and then just be a parent?
Yeah. And presumably, were you still in counseling at
Yes,
this point? Yeah. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So what, how did the counseling help with the anger?
Identifying it, saying how I felt and going back. And I think I also had to do some inner child healing. And that's another conversation, right? That a lot of people don't understand, that the trauma that we go through when we're children, we carry it into parenthood and we think that's the right way. And I had to look back, and one of the things that I got to see is that I had to let go of how I was parent. It wasn't it might have not been the right way, but it was their way. And I had to let go and do my own parenting and learn new skills to be able to parent and let that go. And so those are the challenging things of when you get triggered for your own childhood. Like I remember my father didn't think twice to spank me, you know. And now looking back, I've said, I think I had ADHD, at the time, the way I was, and yet I got spankings. And so now parenting a different way and learning, you do get triggered and you do get that anger, and you have to have the tools to be able to walk away. And I've several times I've had to tell the kids, I can't respond right now. I will have to come back to that.
Yeah. It seems a really steep learning curve.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Is it is it still as steep? Is it leveling off? What does it look
It's
like from you?
leveling off. Yes. I can now see myself that, the kids can be doing A, B, or C, and I can just look at them and just walk away. I don't have to get triggered. I don't have to get in the middle. Like that's their choice.
Yeah,
Again, going back to the choice, and then they have a consequence. Like right now, my 15-year-old, um, he decided he was going to play games at school and not pay attention. And so he had three bad grades. There were Fs. I'm going to be honest. There were three Fs. And this is a GT student. And he's taking his medication. So I'm like, what's going on, Paul? Let's talk about this. And then talking to the teachers, and I saw that he was playing a lot of games and not. So now he has no games, and he keeps saying, "I made up the grades," and I said, "They're not on your report card." So he has no phone now for 2 weeks, and he doesn't have any electronics,
yeah,
and so he's suffering the consequence. But like I told him, these are your choices.
yeah,
And I don't have to be angry.
yeah. And how long is it now since the kids came to live with you?
March has been 15 years
15,
this month, 15 years that the kids have been with me.
15 years. And if you look back on it, when did the learning curve start to level off? Do you remember,
I,
or is that too?
no, I mean, it's gotten gradually easier. I think gradually it's been easier. I think my aha moment though was about 5 years ago when I had surgery and I was really laid out and couldn't do much of anything. And the kids stepped up and really took on taking care of me. And I realized, I didn't do a bad job. I didn't have to keep measuring myself. And I think a lot of times we measure ourselves by feeling like I'm not doing a good job or, because we're just focused on that. So I started about 5 years ago, I started focusing on, what these kids have, and that's when I started giving them choices and I started letting go because I felt I can't control all of this.
Yeah. Well, you can't.
And I did it.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes to that empowerment thing, almost like you when you were ill after the surgery. I guess you didn't have a choice that you just you couldn't, and so you had to let go a little bit, and then the more you let go, the more you saw that you could let go.
Yeah, I could let go, and they did respond in a better way, because I think the controlling part of me was really suffocating them too.
Yeah,
And so when I start letting go, they start thriving. They start doing on their own. So I think that was a learning curve for
yeah,
me.
yeah. I'm starting a course in a couple of weeks, and the lady who's running it sent a questionnaire around, what asking background sort of questions, and what did they? She said, what are the challenges? What are you hoping will be better? And or what issues have you got to address or something like that? So I said, anger, frustration, and control freakery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the you kind of alluded to a little bit in the last answer, but one of the things that you shared with me last time was this belief that you had of not being good enough. Um, has that been with you forever? What I was this did raising the kids bring that up to the fore? What was the story around that?
Well, the story about not being good enough came from my childhood. I was raised with five boys, and I was the only girl for many years. I was 11 years old when my sister was born, and I always felt the need to prove myself, like I was good enough. I had a sense that my mother favored the boys, and I was left behind. And I think that was something that I made up, because she loved me. It's just that there was so much more boys than a girl, and she had to survive all of that. And we were very poor. We grew up in a poor environment, and so one of the things that I didn't have a bedroom. The boys had their own bedroom, but I slept in the living room, for example. And so I always felt like I wasn't good enough to even have a room. I always dreamed about having a white bedroom set, and not until I was married did I get my white bedroom set. But the feeling of not being good enough, I now have done some work on that, and I realized that somewhere I told myself that, I wasn't good enough that to be loved like the boys were being cared for. I mean, I had to help take care of the boys, so I had to grow up. I had to learn how to cook because mom had to work and my dad had to work. So I remember being 11 years old when when my sister was born and taking care of my sister and cooking. I remember, making rice and beans and, things, potatoes, peeling. So I had to grow up really fast to help mom. And so I don't think that I had that nurturing in the childhood that I needed maybe. And I always felt like I had to prove myself. I remember my dad saying I did something that he approved of, and he said, I was a little chunky, I was heavy, and he said to me, "You're worth your weight in gold." You know, in Spanish it sounds different. And so I was like, I didn't understand. If I did something, then I was worth something. And if I didn't do anything, I wasn't worth it. So that not always having to work at something was at play with me all the time, that I had to produce, do something to feel good enough. And so when I got the kids and that came to play because it was like I felt like I was failing at one point where I couldn't control them, right? I couldn't get myself my bearings. And that's when I was crying out to God, I'm not good enough to do this. They need a mother and the father. They don't need just a grandmother. And I felt that that was another point that came up for me, that I wasn't good enough to do this job that God was putting me to do. And so I don't feel that way no more. I know that my identity now is in God, and that I am a daughter of God, and I'm valued. And so, and He loves me the way I am. So that has been resolved. Does it come up once in a while? Yes, but I now have the tools to be able to say I am good enough.
Yeah. Do you remember the moment when you got smart to the idea that you might have made that up? You said you said something about I think I might have just made that belief up, or it might not be true.
That was when I took this course in it was a course that was offered, and it was called Landmark Education. And you go back into what's going on and how you make up stories, and something happens to you and you make up the story. And so I got to see how I made up stories, in like what really happened that had me think that way. And going back and looking at things that happened in my life, I have seen that I might have made that up because I mean, I'm sure, my mom loved me just like she loved my brothers. I just have more responsibilities. And, at 10, 11 years old, and I just thought, I don't have a bedroom. They're different than I am. She doesn't care for me because I don't even have a bedroom. And how did I get to think that way? I don't know what made me think. Maybe somebody said something. I don't know. I haven't discovered that, but I remember thinking, going back and saying, where did I get that idea that I wasn't good enough?
Yeah. It's a fascination for me, this topic. Um, because like the Thriving Adoptees logo is a diamond, as a direct challenge
Yeah.
to the fact that many adoptees would their icon for themselves would not be a diamond.
Hmm.
It would be something else. It might be a, a, a bin or a trash can, as you would call it in the States. And my fascination is how that belief forms. Because, like it forms, it somehow it forms. And I can only kind of talk metaphorically about it. I can't really see it in a different way. But we've all got it. We've all got it, like
We all have it, and what's really hard for I've seen it with the kids. It's really hard for them to be able to thrive with the feeling of their insecurities, right? Why did my parents leave me? I wasn't good enough. And having those talks, as I've learned to define that for me, to talk to them that you are good enough. It's not about you. They didn't leave you because you were not good enough, or they could not make the choice to stop doing their behavior because you weren't good enough. It's because they have a flaw, because they need to get to that point to see why they're feeling that way. And so, I taught my kids that they are good enough. That's why like my child said the other day, he said, I'm not that smart. I can't get A's. And I said, you are smart and you can get A's, but you have to want them. You have to want to change. You have to want to choose not to play games to be able to concentrate. And the same goes with once you identify that you are capable of looking inside and saying, why do I feel I'm not good enough? That whatever happened outside of me is causing me not to be good enough. And we need to look inside why we feel that way. And again, when did it start? And how do we begin to heal that? Because it's a healing process. It's not an aha moment that you get rid of it. It's really a healing process. And I think I talked to you a little bit about the point therapy that we're doing with the program. And that's what we want it to be, is those aha moments. How do you start identifying those behaviors that makes you do certain things? And it's fascinating to me too, to see some of these children crying, getting to their feelings because they see how other people react to them when they're feeling a certain way. And so when I see the kids withdrawn, I don't want to pry, but I'll just say, "You okay?" Just check in with them,
yeah. How do we get them to see that for themselves?
talking about it. Because if you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. If you talk about it, it makes it more real and it makes it more understandable. I talk about it with friends, I talk about it with people, not about them specifically, just in general. And the work that I do, I talk to a lot of grandparents and they hear me talk to them, coaching them on how to be able to talk. Like one of the things that I get asked a lot, how do you talk to these children and let them know that their parents don't, left them? And so, and I'll say something like, just let them see the positive. Don't let them keep, that negative why they were left, and just say, look where you are right now. Look where this is something that God put together for you. And it might not change them right away, but it's so normalized now that we talk about it more, because my grandkids are always with other grandkids and other grandparents. This support that we give each other through these support groups, they don't get to see themselves as they're different. And I think that the community needs to come around them and see them as not as adoptees, as just children. living, and the labels are not important, but we do live in a society. I remember my grandson saying to me, he says, today at school, they asked me if I was going to the mother and son dance. And I told them I don't have a mother. And I said, I am your mother. I will never take your mother's place, your birth mother, but I am your mother to be able to mother you as you grow up. And so those are conversations that we need to have with those children to normalize. It might not be the traditional family, but we are a family, and we are, you do have someone that you can go to the dance with. And some of the other things that we need to understand from these children is how do you can't change all their feelings or their thoughts, but you can normalize them. Yes, you have a mother, but she's older. She's not a younger mother like, your other friends. But yeah, it's a hard place to be.
Yeah. And the community does a lot of the normalization for you, right?
Yes, yes. Because now we have, I have gone to parent conferences, right? Parent and the superintendent is talking to the parents about how great it is to partner up for the school. Thank you, parents, for being, your the first educators at home, and you trust this year at school, and they're doing all that speech. And I remember raising my hand and saying, excuse me, I said, would you please mind addressing the grandparents and the kinship caregivers that are in this room? Because I'm sure there's a lot of aunts, uncles, and grandparents here. And then I went to say, is anyone a grandparent here that is raising a child? And there was people that raised their hands. So normalizing that, even in a room, has caused the shift in thinking that we're all in this together, and the children are looking at that as they're more acceptable, because now even the schools are recognizing the guardianship, the kinship, the grandparents. And so that's one of the things that I've seen being more normalized as far as being accepted.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're coming up on time here, Mercedes. Is there something that you'd like to share that I've not asked you about? Do you think's significant in this thriving conversation?
The last question you were going to ask me is, how do we overcome this obstacles? And I think that the overcoming trauma is just creating that safe place for those children. I think if they feel safe, even the adults, once they have a safe place, I think you can deal with your drama and deal with the drama of the children. And then supportive spaces, building strong connections. We talked about the community, right? I know, my kids, we go to talk to senators, we talk to representatives, we talk to all of these people that can be actually in the conversation and building those strong relationships. Like right now, we have a youth group that actually is it's a support group for youth, and so again, normalizing their situation. They're being raised by a kinship, by a grandma, an older relative, and how do they cope with that? So we had the state representative come in and talk to them, and just really bringing them to be able to speak at a higher level. That I'm here for you. I am your voice. How can I help you change processes, policies, and giving them that empowerment. So I think building those strong connections within the community and having the community see these children as being important constituents of theirs, because they're going to become 18, they're going to be able to vote. So start teaching them those things. Again, guiding them respectfully, and then understanding that there are opportunities to grow. That they don't have to be stuck in their thinking, and that they are a beautiful creation that God made them that way. And if there's anything that's there, they can heal and start thriving. They don't need to be stuck, that there's always a way to be able to encourage one another. And one of the things I remember hearing a long time ago is that how do you how do you thrive? That was your word, right? How do you thrive? I just thinking another metaphor is, when you start the briquettes, the charcoal in the barbecue, you start them all together, and then you fuel them up. You put the lighter, and then you put the fire, and they're all burning together. But what happens if you move one to the side and keep it to the side? It's going to go off. We need to keep them together. We need to have these conversations. We need to continue to educate them, continue to fuel them with the power. And I always say the power of God, always bringing that in to be able to get them that education, the support, everything. So they're not set aside, because one of the things that we like to do as human beings is isolate. We're feeling bad. We don't want to be contagious. We don't want to put people, get people in a, to come. But we need to start shifting our thinking and start saying, how do I get to the joy part? How do I get to feeling better about my situation? I hope that makes sense.
It does. Beautiful. A great place to end it on. Thank you, Mercedes. It's
You're
been
welcome.
a lovely conversation. And thank you to listeners. We'll speak to you very soon. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you.